beautiful people. Well, this audio may seem controversial, but there is no controversy. The controversy is false. Genetics do not lie. And what do genetic studies say as the answer to a simple question? Who in fact descends from the ancient Hebrews, the indigenous Palestinian population, or the Ashkenazi settlers who came from Europe? Good. I'll answer that question in a moment. Actually, not me, the LM notebook, but I want to introduce some of the sources. It's the European Journal of Genetic Studies, Frontier Magazine, Science Magazine, Harvard University, and, well, I'll leave the 11 sources in the summary document for anyone who wants. Now I want to introduce to you the excellent summary that is exceptional artificial intelligence of Google Notebook LM made on the issue. Thank you very much.
Hello, today we are going to dive deep into a question that gives you something to talk about. Where did the Jews come from? I think Nasi is a story full of twists and turns.
Right, and the sources we have here are very diverse.
Very diverse. It has population genetics like that KFS study with kibbutzim families. It has ancient DNA from cemeteries back in the Middle Ages, like Erfurt Norit.
And also articles that explore very different hypotheses, right? That thing of the Rhineland versus the Turkish, Slavic or Khazarian Iran until the origin of the Idshir comes into the dance. Exactly, and the idea here is good to try to unwrap these findings, see the dots more like this. Fascinating and even contradictions, right? To better understand this puzzle.
That's perfect. So let's start with genetics. What is the latest research indicating?
Look at the KFS study, for example. It confirmed what was already known of strong Ashkenazic ancestry in the participants, but it also showed 11 genetic bottlenecks.
Yes, one bottleneck. You mean the population has decreased a lot at some point, right?
Reducing diversity.
And it was a severe and relatively recent bottleneck, you see? In addition, KFS also noticed some subtle genetic differences, like between groups, I think in Eastern and Western Europe.
Interesting, and has that AGPS tool mentioned in the Frontiers article? This one seems to have brought some unexpected results, right? Pointing to Turkey, what's that about?
Yes, this GPS tool is fascinating. She compares genetic markers to current populations, right? And then she located the ancestral origin of many Ashkenazi who were tested there in northeastern Turkey.
Northeast Turkey? Yeah, near old villages with names like Ashkenaz. Things like that. This suggests an ancient genetic link, with populations in that area of the Turkish, Caucasian or Iranian.
Wow, Ashkenaz, that really defies the most traditional hypothesis, the Rhenish, right? The one that talks about the Levant route, Italy, Germany, and then Eastern Europe.
It's quite challenging, even though we know that there was an ancient Jewish presence in Germany, like Worms mines. Genetics seem to suggest another layer there in history, perhaps older, a different mix.
Ancient Iodna, what does he add? You mentioned Erfurt Norit.
So Old Odna complicates, or rather sophisticate the story. The remains of 14th century Erfurt and 12th century Norwich show that genetic bottleneck, I think, Nasi, happened before those dates.
Wow, I read an impressive thing about Erfurt that 1/3 of the individuals analyzed there had the same mitochondrial DNA, that of the maternal lineage.
Exactly.
Indicating that they descended from a single woman who saw maybe 500 to 1,000 years before them. A specific maternal lineage became very, very common there.
That's amazing.
A single ancestor.
It's strong, isn't it? And there's another analysis also in Frontiers, which compared this ancient DNA. It showed that medieval Ashkenazins cluster genetically closer to ancient peoples of Anatolia and Neolithic Iran
than ancient Levantines.
Modern Palestinians and Bedouins, by contrast, cluster closer to the ancient Levantines. according to this study.
From then on, the ancient DNA seems to reinforce this idea of a significant ancestral connection outside the Levant.
Is that an interpretation that matches this data? Yes, now you have. Another perspective that appears in the sources comes from an article on the CART website called DNA Never Lies.
Oh yes, and it's important for us to say that this specific source, it promotes the Khazarian hypothesis, right? The conversion of Turkish tribes.
Exactly. And what does this source claim, if so many studies? But look, without giving complete references in the material we analyzed, is that most Israelis today would not have ancient Hebrew DNA.
What about Palestinians?
That, they say, they also criticize a specific study by a researcher named Shai Carming. It's important to point out we're just reporting what this source says without endorsing the conclusions or how they present the data. Okay, right?
Of course, it is a different view that is there in the debate. Well, in addition to these great ancestry lines, genetics also reveals specific markers, right? Kaffer mentioned a body weight related one, he did.
Yes, they identified a genetic variant near a gene called MSRA. It is associated with weight and is much more common in Ashkenaz type 1% in KEFs versus almost nothing in non-Jewish Europeans, and this was confirmed in another Israeli study as well.
Interesting. What about genetic diseases, the markers for them?
These also tell an important story, markers for genetic diseases that are common today in Ashkenaz. They have already been found in the medieval DNA of Noriti and Asfert, and on the same frequencies practically.
Oh, so the genetic profile was kind of established centuries ago?
Exactly. Strongly suggests that. CAPS also found variants enriched in cancer pathways, but did not find a clear direct correlation between this enrichment and increased functional risk, at least not in general.
Got it. And all this complexity isn't just in the genes, is it? It has the language too, the id. Where did this lead in the end?
The Frontiers article touches on this debate. The IDES has strong roots in Slavic languages, perhaps linked to Jewish traders there on the Silk Road, which would be the Iranian-Turkish Slavic hypothesis.
Or is the origin mainly German, linked to the Rhenish hypothesis?
Exactly, and the word itself thinks that nash, right? It has changed its meaning over time. You have already mentioned Iranian Scythians. Then to the Slavs and only later to the Germans. It's also semantic confusion.
Gee, so the picture that emerges from all of this is it's very multifaceted. Genetics, history, linguistics, gift, clues. But they don't all point in the same direction simply, do they? As for the origins, I think it's NASA.
Perfect. This is what various genetic studies, including those of ancient DNA, consistently suggest to a significant ancestry outside the Levant, with possible events of origin or important mixing in regions such as ancient Anatolia, Iran, the Caucasus.
Because it challenges those narratives, but it's linear, so to speak.
It certainly challenges simpler narratives of a single and direct origin in the Levant, and the research continues, right? Leaving the picture more detailed, but also perhaps more complex.
It is a reflection. So how do you understand this complex tapestry of origins, with narratives that sometimes even conflict? How does this influence the perception of identity and belonging today?
The conclusions then are quite obvious. The people who descend from the ancient Hebrews, those of the Old Testament Bible, are the Palestinians, in fact. The Ashkenazi Jews who illegally occupied those lands are ironically descended from Iranians and Turks and Germans. They are from Erfurt and Norwich, England. Anglo-Germans, the Ashkenazim, are Anglo-Germans who are descended from Turks and Iranians, while those who are descended from Anglo-Germans. Of the Hebrews of the Old Testament are exactly the Palestinians. You see the irony of the story, right? The falsification of history to justify cheap colonialism in an apartheid system.